Welcome to Section 1, Storycraft. Now let's get started. Now everybody knows a good story when they hear it and a bad story when they hear it. Now a good story, you're very engaged into it. You want to understand what's going on. You're listening very intently or you're watching very intently because the story is really engrossing you. And if you were to leave before the story was over, you wouldn't be able to handle it because you want to know how the story ends. And that's what makes a good story, is that it engages you the entire time until the very end when it's over. But then there's a bad story. You can hear a bad story and it just doesn't really engage you. You're not really that interested in it. You find yourself doing other things, not really paying attention, or your mind wanders. And that's when you know you're hearing a bad story. So when we talk about story, there's ways that make stories really good, and then there's ways that we want to stay away from to get away from telling stories badly. And so let's talk about a few of the key things that I think are really important about story, the way that story works. And the first thing is that the stories captivate. I mean, you know this. If you saw Lord of the Rings, you find yourself completely engaged with the whole entire movie. Or if you're reading a book, you can find yourself totally engaged. You just want to keep turning page after page. Even if it's after midnight, you don't care. You're going to keep reading because you want to know how the story ends. They have this ability to captivate your mind where you want to stay engaged. You want to keep going on with it. And what's really great, they're so captivating that the more captivating they are, the better imagined world that the story itself creates. You find yourself believing everything in the story. It doesn't matter if the story is completely science fiction or just very present day realism type stuff. It doesn't really matter. It captivates you and you'll find yourself believing the story no matter if it's about hobbits or spaceships or whatever it happens to be. You're totally captivated in it. You're buying everything and you're listening. Another thing a story can do that's really interesting is that a story can elicit emotional response. Now, if I started reading you a menu from a restaurant around here, you're probably not going to do much as far as your emotions go. You're probably going to tune out and think, well, that's really boring. However, a story can elicit emotion from you. You can be watching a movie or you can be watching a TV show or reading a book, and you can find yourself, tearing up sometimes or really scared sometimes, whatever it happens to be. You'll find it creating these emotions in you, and all you're doing is watching a movie or reading a book. How does a story do that? Finding Nemo is a great Pixar. Pixar is a great company to tell stories. And Finding Nemo was just one of those movies where you have a dad fish trying to find his lost son fish, and you're talking about an animated movie and there's just fish. And yet even then there are times when I'm completely wrapped into the story and my heart is going out to the father and there's some tense moments and I'm completely engaged in the story. That is not even real. I mean, they're talking fish. And so a story can really do an amazing thing as far as eliciting an emotional response from the audience. Another great thing about stories is that they can illustrate truth in unique ways. I mean, in fact, stories are one of the most powerful ways to communicate truth. I mean, whether you're watching a movie or a book, you can have a story that's all about one thing, but what it's really about can be a universal truth that's going on. For instance, we just talked about Finding Nemo. Well, Finding Nemo is about a father trying to find his son. But what the movie really is about how kids grow up and parents have to learn how to deal with that. It can be very difficult for a parent to let their child go from being a kid to being more an adult, even if you're talking about a fish. It doesn't really make a lot of sense because it's a fish, but it really does. That's what the movie really is about. It's about a parent letting go and a child growing up, and that's what it's about. So stories can illustrate truth in unique ways. In fact, when we look at Jesus, he told stories all the time. He did parables, different ways to illustrate the truth of the kingdom of God. So in many ways, a story can be a powerful tool if you're trying to communicate truth to somebody and you need something a little more engaging, something to paint the picture of truth rather than just state a factual statement. So just like math, let's talk about math for just a second. This is not a math class, but math has a universal form. If you say 2 + 2, you're always going to equal 4, unless you go to some weird kind of mind game thing way above my level of math knowledge. But math has a universal form that God just made it. It just exists. You just have to deal with it. You have to learn all the rules about math and so on. Story is the same way. It has this universal form, a universal structure of how a story should work. And you need to understand the basic elements of the story if you're going to become a good storyteller. And as you get more and more advanced in your story craft, what you might find yourself doing is there are some rules that you can bend and some rules that you can break, but there is some elements to the story that are just concrete. They just exist, and you have to become aware of those things if you're going to be a good storyteller so that you learn where you can bend and break break rules and where you really cannot. And so for this first class, as we're talking about storycraft, the first thing we need to do is talk about those 3 key elements that are found in any story. This is the basic, most simple structure for stories ever. So I'm going to use the board a little bit here. We're going to talk about the 3 main parts, any story. The first part you're going to have is what we're going to call is a setup. All right, a setup. Now a setup, an easy way to imagine this is that every story starts off and it says, all right, there was a dude, once upon a time there was a princess up in a castle, and you're like, why is she in the castle? Doesn't really matter. You have a setup. There's some knowledge that needs to be given to you as the audience that they need to know if they're going to engage in the story. And so there's this brief time called the setup where we're going to get that information. What we're also going to get in the setup is we're going to understand the balance of the world that we're in. So when we start out, we don't just drop in the middle of, okay, well, I don't understand what's going on. There's chaos everywhere. No, we're going to start off showing a world where a world is balanced, where your hero character, which we'll talk about later, where that world is balanced and normal. You're going to see a normal world. So when you get to a setup, it's easy to imagine it like this is the world and it's going this way. And left to itself, it's just going to keep going that way. That's what the setup is all about. And then we get to the second part, which is where it's really fun, in all honesty. And that's what we're going to call conflict. Conflict. There we go. You have conflict. Conflict upsets the world. Something happens. There's a setup. Everything is going fine. And then something happens. I mean, for example, if I told you, okay, I went this morning and I was going through a drive-through to get some coffee. And I get the coffee and I'm waiting in the drive-through. And so far, nothing interesting is happening. It's just me. I'm in a car driving through a drive-through. So what? Who cares? We need an introduce moment. That was a horrible way to phrase that. We need a moment that introduces conflict into the moment. And so if I said, okay, so I'm in the drive-thru one morning and I'm getting coffee and the lady goes to hand me the coffee, but the lid wasn't on it. And so suddenly it breaks and it spills all over my lap in the car. Well, now we're in conflict. Now you want to know, well, what happens? What'd you do? You have stains all over your clothes. Did the coffee people reimburse you? What happened? You don't know. Everything was going a normal way. The world was balanced. I was just doing a normal thing. And then conflict. Something upsets it. Something gets it changed. Something has caused chaos and has unbalanced the world. So when we talk about conflict, we're going to talk about there's a break in the setup. Something happens that's going to send the story off in a completely new, unexpected direction. And the hero, or whoever our heroes happen to be, are going to have to deal with this conflict because even though they didn't plan for it, even though their world was set up nicely and normal, now they have conflict, and now they have to deal with it. They have no choice. The coffee's in their lap, so to speak, right? And then we get to the last part of any story, which is resolution. Resolution. Boom, there you go, resolution. So we have our setup, we have our conflict, and now we have resolution. And what resolution is the way that the story resolves itself. We want to know, okay, your life was this way, and conflict happened. Well, but then what'd you do? What happened? What happened? If this coffee's in your lap, now what do you do? And so they want to know, how does it resolve? So every story has this moment where everything's going one way, they hit conflict, and then they have to change their direction to return balance the way it was. So their life was balanced, conflict upset that balance, and then resolution is balance restored. So in any case, if I had spilled coffee in my lap, which I've never done, I would say, hopefully I would be nice about it, and I would change clothes, go home, change clothes, and maybe they give me a free drink or something. Story resolved, everyone's happy, everyone can now go home, right? So those are the 3 basic elements of any story anywhere. It doesn't really matter the length of the story. If you think about it, the next time you're talking to your friends and somebody says, oh, hey, you won't believe what happened. Well, that's the cue that they're about to tell you the story of what happened. And what they're going to tell you is their life was going one way, they were doing something, everything was fine, and then conflict happens. A conflict happens, oh my gosh, you won't believe what happened. And then guess what? It's okay because the story resolved itself, and that is how I dealt with it. Every story, doesn't matter, is always going to have these 3 points. They're just part of the universal form. You have to deal with it. You have to have these things. If you don't, the story is just not going to be very good. So what we're going to do now is I want to go to an example from a short Pixar film called Jerry's Game. We're going to look at it. It's a little 4-minute film, and we're going to examine, does it have these elements in it? And how does it have these elements? How do those elements play out in the story? So we're going to take a look at that, and then we're going to come back and talk. All right, so this is Jerry's Game. Start off with a table, leaves, there's a chessboard, titles, always gotta have a title. And now we have chess pieces, and we've got setting it up, literally setting up. How funny, because this is the setup section. I know it's irony, I know you can't contain yourself. So yeah, he sets up the board here. All right, so we got the board set up. We're ready to play. Got a nice little old man, he's looking around. Oh, now look, he finds himself a chair, he sits down, ready to rock and roll. All right, let's get this game started. Oh, see, look, we have glasses, here we go. And the move. Now, introduce conflict. He's in a park, there's no one around. Who's he gonna play? I mean, that's the conflict that he has, is that, okay, there's nobody to play with him. How is he gonna deal with it? His life was going one way, everything was good, he was in the park to play chess, but he's all alone. And now we see him walk over, we're kind of curious as to what he's doing, and oh my goodness, it's almost like he has multiple personalities here. He's laughing and gets to the other side of the table. Now notice we have two distinct parts of him. He's playing himself. It's got the him here that's sitting down, and he's got the glasses. See? There he is, glasses. And he seems to be timid, a little more humble, unsure of himself. And meanwhile, we have this guy, the more cocky little old man. And now we're playing back and forth. The conflict is literally within himself. He is battling it out with himself. Now let's introduce some escalation to our conflict, and let's add another level. What happens when you start losing to yourself? Because now, oh dear, the stakes have gone up a little bit. I mean, who wants to play that guy? All right, so the game continues, and oh no. Let's escalate the conflict even more. Like, not only are you losing, you're starting to lose really bad, man. Really, really bad. He's got like 2 pieces left. So, what happens when you're playing a game against yourself and yourself is beating you? That's the problem. Is that, oh no, he's letting the old cocky guy win. Look how smug. Look at those glasses. Oh no, and now what happens when yourself, uh-oh. Is he having a heart attack? See, so right now what we're dealing with is how do you return the world to balance when you started a game with yourself and then yourself turns out to be a really cocky old man and you're beating you, and what happens if you give yourself a heart attack because he realizes, wait a minute, if I'm dead, he's dead, I'm dead, what's going on? And look at that, a literal flipping, turning of the table here. He gets back up. Yeah, everything's fine. Don't worry, everything's fine. So they return to the game. And now notice. Because if you can play against yourself and you can lose against yourself, then you can also fool yourself, right? So here, oh no, he's turned the tables and checkmate. Game over. And he's laughing. We have resolution. He did have conflict, but now everything's back to normal. Oh wait, one last little thing. And we've got some teeth. And we pull back. So even the boring day at the park alone by yourself can have conflict in it and stuff. So we have setup, conflict, and resolution. There you go. Okay, so that's Jerry's game. And so as you can see, Jerry's game filled in. It had setup, conflict, resolution. Everything was balanced one way, and then suddenly there's conflict. There's no one to play with him, and so on, and everything we just talked about. So those 3 elements are huge. You got to learn those elements, embrace those elements. These are rules that you have to have. You can't really bend or break these ones. Okay, so let's look at a story that you've heard before. Most everybody has heard the story of Humpty Dumpty. And let's see how Humpty Dumpty illustrates for us setup, conflict, and resolution. Because Humpty Dumpty, it's just a short nursery rhyme, but yet it will have all 3 of these elements. So we start with line 1. Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall. So, you got a wall, we'll put Humpty on it. I mean, I guess he should smile. There. That's the worst Humpty Dumpty in the history of Humpty Dumpty, but whatever. So Humpty Dumpty sits on a wall. That's the first sentence. And so far, everything in Humpty Dumpty's life is going fantastic. His world is balanced. Everything is normal. There he is doing whatever it is he's doing. But there's no problem. There's no conflict yet. That's just the setup, and it's in our first line. Then we have the second line. Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall. Humpty Dumpty had a great fall, right? And so boom, he's down there, now at the bottom. And that's where we have conflict. So his story was going this way, and now we have, like I said, we have conflict. We have a problem. Humpty Dumpty took a great fall, and now Humpty Dumpty is broken. I don't know how to draw a broken Humpty Dumpty. I don't know why he looks so much like an egg either, but whatever. There he is. He's on the ground like a really sad-looking egg. This is a class about storycraft, not about art. Okay, so don't worry about it. Anyway, so you have conflict. So Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall, conflict, Humpty Dumpty had a great fall, and now we need, how does this resolve? And so we find out that all the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put Humpty together again. So we have resolution. It's just kind of sad one, really, because poor Humpty Dumpty, that's the end of Humpty Dumpty. So he started his day, it was balanced, we have conflict, and he's now broken. And then we have resolution, which is, well, nobody could fix him. They tried, and I don't really know what the horses had to do with any of it, but there you go. So there's a simple story. Now, you can look at other illustrations for this. You can look at Goldilocks and the Three Bears, pretty much any nursery rhyme, and they're going to have these same elements: setup, conflict, and resolution. So I want you to start thinking about it and start looking for story structure in the things that you do. When people are talking in conversation around you, are they talking in this? Because I bet that they are, because people always are using story structure to communicate what's going on in their life. They're going to say, well, yeah, everything was fine, everything was going good, and then my sibling punched me, and now we have conflict. But don't worry, they got in trouble, and I have a black eye now, but it'll get better. Resolution, right? So everything that is going on around you really is going to be encased in this story structure. That's why it's so powerful. It's going on all the time, all around you. Everybody is living various forms of story at any given time at various points of setup, conflict, and resolution. So those are the three major things you're going to need to know. So now let's take a moment and look at your class project.